L'chaim, everybody.
Chaim?
So on December 11th, in the year 1936, George VI became king of the United Kingdom and the British Commonwealth. Now, he was not supposed to be the king. As a matter of fact, his older brother, Edward VIII, was the king.
He died.
But no, he didn't die. He abdicated his reign. He gave up his rights to be a king because he wanted to marry an American divorcee, a Wallace Simpson, and that was apparently against the rules from the royal family.
Going rules.
So I guess the same idea, right? So
Why would he do that? To give up his ring?
he wanted to marry someone that he loved. And he was willing to give up his position as
Why can't he
king.
just make it
So
look
the
like
job was thrust upon George VI. Now, George VI had a unique problem as a king. You see, George, from a very young age, he suffered from a terrible stutter. Now, 100 years earlier, it would not be a big deal for a king to stutter. I'm sure there have been many kings in the past that had a terrible stutter. But in 1936, this was the beginning of the age of radio and television, where a king's every word and every speech was broadcast live for his entire nation. And it certainly wouldn't look very good if the king got up to give a speech and he was stuttering. To make this problem even more severe, England was about to enter into war with Germany. And, the German ruler, of course, a horrible, terrible person in every way, but if there was one good aspect to him, so to speak, one advantage that he had, was that he was a great speaker. And he knew how to whip a crowd up into a frenzy, and, he can get up in front of a crowd, and they were all following him within a few minutes. So it wouldn't look very good if you had the German ruler, who was a great speaker, and the English king who was stuttering. United Kingdom.
How's that in English?
England. Right? So, after going to many doctors who were not able to help him, George met an Australian speech therapist, Lionel Logue. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He used very unconventional techniques, and he actually, after a few years, succeeded in helping George not get rid of, but at least manage his stutter. And the exact techniques that he used were not, weren't documented. We don't have the exact details of it, but there are a few stories that are told. One of the stories that went around and actually was kind of put into a movie about, I think, in 2010, the movie The King's Speech, which was all about King George VI, discusses a certain technique that he came up with. The King George was working really hard on improving his stutter, but it wasn't really working out, and he was becoming very frustrated. And his therapist started pushing him. It's an embarrassment. You're a king. How can you speak like that? You got to get over it. And this didn't help him very much. Being pressured certainly didn't help with his stutter. And finally, he kind of told his therapist to back off. But his therapist didn't back off. His therapist kept on pushing. And finally, King George lost his temper, and he started to yell, and he started to curse at his therapist. And he went on for like 2 minutes yelling and cursing. And finally, after he finished yelling and he quieted down, he noticed that Lionel, his therapist, was smiling. And he looks, he's like, "What are you laughing about? What are you so happy about?" So he said, "I noticed that during the last 2 minutes when you were yelling and cursing at me, you didn't stutter." Right? You didn't stutter. So he says, "Yeah, of course, I was furious. I was angry." So he says, so we have to figure out how to channel that anger and overcome your stuttering. Right? And obviously it wasn't an easy thing, but they were able to use this as one of the techniques to overcome his stutter. So even though anger in general can often have terrible consequences, but anger is something that's very powerful. And if we learn how to channel our anger in the right direction, we can use it in a positive way. So in this week's Parsha, before Yaakov passes away, he calls together all of his children, and he begins to bless all of his children. The Torah tells us each one received a blessing. But when we actually look at what he said to his children, we find that it doesn't actually appear that all of his children received a blessing. We take a look at his two children, Shimon and Levi, and Yaakov speaks to them, and he starts, he mentions what they did in their anger, how they destroyed the city of Shechem, and how they sold their brother into slavery. And Yaakov says, Or Apam, cursed is their rage. He asked for it is fierce, and cursed be their fury, for it is very harsh. I will spread them and scatter them out amongst Yaakov and Israel. And this doesn't, obviously, seems a bit out of place. Yaakov is blessing all of his children before he passes away. And instead of blessing his two sons, Shimon and Levi, he starts cursing them out. It seems a bit strange, right? Why does he choose now to do it? And what's the, together with the blessing of all the other children? So in order to understand this, every Friday night, we welcome in Shabbos. We start off with Kabbalah Shabbos. Right? And some nice songs and some nice, a lot of good chazan, some good chazanas over there. And sometimes we listen to the chazan sing and we get all involved in the nice tune that he's singing, and we don't stop for a minute to think about the words that he's saying. Right? So how does the chazan start off Kabbalah Shabbos? Of course, we start off the Chunaranina, and then the chazan gets to the end, and he gets up. He goes, and by where I daven, they do the whole Kalbach song, but it's they have the whole thing. But the Chazan gets up and he goes, Arboim Shana Kut B'Doir V'Imar Am Toyelei V'Heim V'Heim Le'Yadu D'Racha Yasher Nishbati V'Yapim Yevo Yonel Menuchasi. Right? Now, it sounds very nice, right? Chazan's speaking very nicely. Sounds like a bit, very encouraging, upbeat chapter. But if you actually look at the words are, for 40 years, Hashem says, I have quarreled with this generation of people, right? They are people with corrupt hearts, and they don't follow my ways. And for this reason, in my great anger, I swore that they will never go into the land of Eretz Yisrael. Right? And this is how we start off our Shabbos. How nice tune. Right? And as soon as we finish, we move on. Mizmor LeDavid, Havul Hashem B'nei Eli. Where we go into the next tune, a song for David. What's going on? First of all, why do we start off Shabbos with this verse? Right? And why do we sing it as if it's some nice, uplifting song that we're singing, right? When it seems a little bit out of place. So, in the city of Vilna, lived an elderly Jew. His name was Reb Zundel, and Reb Zundel was celebrating his 100th birthday, right? And he made a big party to celebrate your 100th birthday. Right? And he invited, of course, all of his children and grandchildren, the whole family. And I don't think he had too many friends left over, but I guess, people that knew him, acquaintances. And they all came to celebrate his birthday. And one of his sons got up and he said, Father, what you Baruch Hashem has blessed you with such a long life. This is a phrase from the Talmud. Whenever a sage in the Talmud lived to an old age, they would ask him, what special mitzvah did you do? What special merit did you have that allowed you to live so long? So Zundel says to his children, I've thought about it lately. And, I'm not really, I don't have any special mitzvah I can attribute it to, but there's one story I think might be connected to it. When I was a young boy, I once had the merit to daven behind the Vilna Gaon, the Gaon of Eliyahu of Vilna, and I was standing behind him during davening. I didn't notice that I walked a little too close to him, and I stepped on his tzitzis, on his talis, from the tzitzis that were hanging down from his talis. I stepped on his tzitzis, and I was just standing there. So he turned around, he looked at me, he saw his little boy standing behind him, so he smiled at me and he bent down, and he said to me in Yiddish, Yingel, so it's lying Leben, young boy, may you live long. can you please move over so I can, release my tzitzis? And he says, I got a bracha from the Vilna Gaon. He told me, Yingel zos lang leben, right? Young boy, you should live long. So that's probably the reason why I've lived so long, right? So it's an interesting story. But when I heard it, obviously the question is, if you want to live long, maybe you should find a tzaddik and step on his tzitzis, right? It doesn't seem like a very good approach. But it wasn't on purpose, that's true. But maybe I should just hang around Sneakim and accidentally step on their tzitzis, right? So what's the message over here? So the idea is that when somebody steps on your tzitzis, right? You have a couple of ways to approach it. Right? On one hand, you could yell at him. Look what you're doing. Look where you're walking. Don't just step on people's tzitzis. You're in shul. Look around. Or you can turn around and you can smile and you can take whatever anger that you have and channel it into giving him a blessing. Right? And that's what the Vilna Gaon decided to do. Right? Instead of yelling at him and telling him how clumsy he was, right? And telling him how he has to respect the tzaddik when he's standing behind such a big rav, the Vilna Gaon decided he's going to focus it in a positive way, right? And this is something that we find by many tzaddikim. There are countless stories. The Shin of a Rav, Rabbi Yecheskel Shraga Halberstam, the author of the Divrei Yecheskel, he was the oldest son of the Divrei Chaim, the Tzanzer Rebbe, the first Tzanzer Rebbe. So, in 1879, he traveled to Israel and he settled in Tzfas, in Yerushalayim. He stayed in Israel for 2 years. And when he was in Tzfas, he established the Tzanzer Shul, which is still there today, and they built a mikveh over there. And while he was there, he would go, of course, to the mikveh every morning. And he had an interesting custom. He would get up very, very early and go to the mikveh. And he would make sure he was always the first one in the mikveh. Right? Now, some people like to do that just because of privacy reasons or other things. But he had, whatever Kabbalistic reasons he had, he always wanted to be the first one in the mikveh. And everybody knew that. They would wait till the Rebbe would go and before anybody else would go to the mikveh. One morning, he comes into the mikveh, and immediately, as soon as he walked in, he sensed that there was somebody there before him. Right? There was nobody there at the time, but somebody had been there and left, and he sensed that somebody was there. And he turns to the attendant over there, and he says, "Who is here? Who came to the mikveh before me?" And the attendant was quiet; he didn't want to say anything. And the Rebbe says, "What's going on? No one's supposed to go. I'm supposed to be first in the mikveh." And the attendant was quiet. There was this Jew living in Tzfas. His name was Baruch and his wife had been married for almost 20 years now, and they didn't have children. And they were very a little bit. Their house was very quiet, and they would both of them, him and his wife, would get up early in the morning to daven to Hashem to bless them with a son, with a child. And that morning, Baruch had gone to the mikveh before the Rebbe. And the attendant didn't want to say anything, right? So he kept quiet. And the Rebbe's yelling, "What's going on? Who went to the mikveh before me?" And Baruch was nearby, heard what was going on, so he comes over and he's like, "I'm so sorry, Rebbe, I forgot. I'm really supposed to be first. It was me." And the Rebbe turns and he says, You were the one who went to the mikveh before me?" And he says, "Yeah, it was me." He says, "Well, this year, you should have a son." Right? And that's what happened. A year later, the Divrei Yecheskel was called to be the Sande at this boy's bris. Right? And he got up during the bris and he said, when I felt that someone was there before me, I felt an anger inside of me. It's something very unusual. And I decided that it's not something, if I have such a feeling, of course, I have to, it's not something I should just throw away. I have to figure out how to channel it in a positive way, right? And therefore, I was able to channel it into a blessing. In the city of Lelev, there was an old guy. His name was Vladimir. And he lived to, he was 118 years old.
What did you do?
Lelev. Not sure exactly where it was.
It's not Lvov.
What?
Not Lvov.
No, not Levov. Tzaddik, the big tzaddik of David Lelev. And he was 118 years old, and he became sick. And yes, a goy. And they figured, the doctor said it was over, right? They should call the priest, right, to say his last confession. And he said, no, I'm good. I'm gonna be okay. And sure enough, a couple days later, he got better. And they asked him, how did you know you're gonna get better? And he said, I'll tell you the story. He said, many years ago, when I was a little boy, I was a bit wild and a bit of a prankster. And I noticed that, in our town, there was this big rabbi, Rabbi David Lelever, who would wake up every morning to go to the mikvah. Right? He would go to the stream at the edge of the city. And I decided to have some fun at his expense. So one day, I found like a broken bottle, a broken glass bottle, and I took the broken pieces of glass and I put it on the spot where he would go to the mikvah. I spread out shards of glass, right? And I got up early in the morning to see what would happen. And sure enough, he came to the mikvah and he walked, and I noticed that he jumped, his foot stepped on the glass. One of his feet started to bleed, but he didn't stop. He continued. He went to the mikvah. I was so excited. I went and I told all my friends what I did to get that Jewish rabbi. I got him, right? I pranked him, right? Today you would put it on Instagram, right? You'd share it. You'd put it on your channel. You would get a lot of likes. But in those days, they would just go around telling people, right? And apparently, my parents found out, and everybody in the city knew what a holy tzaddik this rabbi was. And my father, as soon as he heard, he grabbed me, started yelling at me. And he told me what a terrible thing I did, and he told me I have to go apologize to this rabbi. Right? I was a little embarrassed, but my father explained to me that what I did was, what the terrible thing that I had done, and how this rabbi was so holy. So I went to apologize, right? And I went to the rabbi and I told him, I'm so sorry. I was the one who put the glass. I was a terrible mistake. I'm sure you're really mad at me. And he says, and the rabbi looks at me and he smiles, and he says, I want you to know that you gave me a big test this morning. You gave me a big nisayon, and I was able to overcome the test and go to the mikvah, right? It was tremendous merit, he said, and you are a part of it. And I bless you that you should live until 120. And he said, I'm only 118. I still got some time, right? So again, right? We have we all have times that we step on some broken glass, right? And the question is, what do? We can choose to get upset and yell at the people around us, right? Or we could choose to say that the anger inside of us is something that we could channel, something that's very powerful. So there was a Chaim. Was a Jew who lived in Brooklyn. He wasn't very religious, and he left. He didn't live a Torah life. But one day he became very sick, and he went to different doctors. They weren't able to help him, and previously he had been a Tzanzer Chassid, or his parents had been Tzanzer Chassidim, and somebody suggested that he should go to the Tzanzer Rebbe for a bracha. So he was a little bit reluctant, but he figured he'll go to the Tish, right? Every Friday night, the Rebbe would have a big Tish where people would come. So he figured he'll go to the Tish and see if he can get a bracha from the Rebbe. So he comes into Shul. The Shul is packed full of people, right? Hundreds of people are gathered there for the Tish. And so he takes a place all the way in the corner of the room. And the Rebbe starts talking, and he's starting to get, the Rebbe's talking, and it's getting a bit boring. So he turns to the people around him and he starts talking to them, having a conversation, right? The Rebbe's Gabbai hears there's noise in the back, somebody's talking, and he goes, Shah, Shah, right? Everybody be quiet. So he was quiet for a minute or so, and then he started talking again. The Gabbai again tried to get everybody to be quiet, but he continued talking. And finally it was starting to become a bit of a nuisance, like a distraction. So the Rebbe finally spoke up, and he said, if anybody wants to talk, they're welcome to leave and sei gesund, right? To leave and sei gesund. Sei gesund is literally means to be healthy, but in Yiddish it's like have a good day, right? So he said, I got my bracha. I came for a bracha from the Rebbe, right? To be healthy. I'm sick. I wanted a bracha to be gesund, and the Rebbe said, if anybody wants to talk, they can go outside and sei gesund. Wonderful. So he left, and sure enough, 2 days later, everything was gone. Right? So again, right? Someone's talking during your speech. You can get and start yelling at them, or you could say sei gesund, right? It's a much more pleasant way of saying it, and you can take the energy from the anger and turn it into a blessing. In 1989. Rabbi Elyashiv agreed to join the leadership of the Degel HaTorah party in Israel, the Israeli government. And as you can imagine, getting involved in politics is, you're never going to make everybody happy. And there were people who were not happy with his decision. And one day he's walking in the street, and this Jew comes over to him and starts yelling at him, and starts telling him what a terrible mistake he made and how he shouldn't have started joining this party and what terrible things are going on. And he's yelling and yelling, and Rabbi Elyashiv is trying to ignore him, but he's going on and on. He's yelling and yelling. And Rabbi Elyashiv was quiet. Finally, Rabbi Elyashiv, after a few minutes, he looks at him and he says, may it be Hashem's will that you shouldn't have time for this type of stuff. And that year, the guy gave birth to quintuplets.
Wow.
Right? So again, right? Somebody's yelling at you, and you have a few different ways to make them stop, right? And Rabbi Elyashiv chose to stop it by giving him a blessing, right? By blessing him that he shouldn't have time for such nonsense. There was a man who would go, a chassid would go to the Vizhnus or chassid. I don't know his name was. We'll call him for I'm not sure what his name was. He would come to the every Friday night to the tish of the Imrei Chaim, and he would spend his tish would go on for many hours, and he would spend many hours at the Rebbe's tish every Friday night, and his wife wasn't very happy, right? His wife was not from a Hasidic family, and she wasn't used to this. That Friday night the husband goes to the Rebbe and spends hours at his tish. She's used to Friday night. Father sits at the Shabbos table with his children, spends time with his family, and her husband goes to the Rebbe's tish every Shabbos. And she's yelling at her husband. She's not happy with this, and her husband says, "Listen, I'm a chassid of the Vizhnus HaChassid, and this is what we do." And she says, "Okay, you want to go for an hour? Go for an hour. What are you spending 3-4 hours there?"
You record this for my wife.
So he says, how could I, if I go to the Rebbe's tish, I want to be there the whole time. And he says, listen, there are probably some bachrim, some unmarried people who are sitting there for hours, but for a married person with 5 children at home, you shouldn't spend that long there. And he's like, no, this is good. I spend a good, he's happy with the time he spends there. And his wife is very, very angry, and she decides to have a word with the Rebbe. Right? So she visits the Imrei Chaim, and she gives him a piece of her mind, right? My husband, every Friday night, so instead of spending time with the family, he goes to your tish. Not only does he go to your tish, he spends 3-4 hours there every Friday night. And the Rebbe's like, okay, we'll talk to your husband, we'll work something out. He's like, no, Rebbe, I want you to tell me right now, is this normal? Spend 3-4 hours at the tish? Rebbe, how long should a father of 5 children spend at the Rebbe's tish? And the Rebbe's like, don't worry, I'll talk to your husband, we'll figure something out. And she says, no, I want an answer right now. How long should a husband and a father of 5 children spend at the Rebbe's tish? The Rebbe says, how long? You should spend 120 years going to the Rebbe's tish. Right? Now, as soon as she heard this, she couldn't argue with that, and she said, Amen, Rebbe. She never caused him any problems again. Right?
20 years?
I didn't hear the end of the story. I hope
Should have
so.
done it more.
I hope so.
Why does this story happen?
Right? I hope so. The Rebbe said he should go to the Tish till 120.
It happened more than 120 years ago?
I'm not sure when the story happened. I didn't hear the end of the story.
He lived until
But the idea is, right? You could, the Rebbe could have said, "Stop bothering me. I'll talk to your husband. Work this thing out." But the Rebbe knew that he can use her anger and his frustration, right? Instead of yelling at her, to turn it into a blessing. And this is, of course, we had many stories. We had many stories of tzaddikim, great tzaddikim who were able to do this. But this is not only a behavior which applies to tzaddikim. This is something that we can all do to a certain extent. Maybe not on the same level, right? But we can all do it to some extent in our own lives, right? 41 years ago, on Shabbos Bereshis, in the year...
It was 41 years ago?
What? 41 years ago, on Shabbos Bereshis, in the year Tafshin Mem Beis. Sorry, Tafshin Mem Gimel. Tafshin Mem Gimel, was it?
Right now it's Tafshin Pei Dal.
Yes, so it was 41 years ago. Tafshin Mem Gimel, Shabbos Bereshis. So my grandfather, Moshe Morozov, he went to the Farbrengen since in 770 to be with the Rebbe for Shabbos Bereshis, the Farbrengen. And at that time there was they were looking for a shidduch for one of their daughters, one of my aunts. And it was it's always difficult shidduchim. Even 41 years ago there was already a bit of a shidduch crisis. And my aunt was at the time 23 years old, which today I guess wouldn't be considered a big problem, but in those days 23 was like considered very, very late. And they were looking, and it was hard to find, and So Shabbos Bereshis, my grandfather went to the Farbrengen in 770, and the Rebbe called him over. My grandfather was involved in the Chama organization, which was helped Jews from Russia who were leaving Russia, and the Rebbe gave my grandfather a small bottle of mashke. A small bottle of mashke, I guess, the Farbrengen, from this Farbrengen. So obviously it's Shabbos, so my grandfather took the bottle of mashke and he wrapped it up in his talis and he put it in his locker in 770, right? And he continued Farbrengen for the rest of the day, and after Shabbos, he wanted to go home after Ma'ariv to leave, and he completely forgot about the bottle of mashke. And he goes to his locker, and he pulls out his talis, and the bottle of mashke slips out and smashes all over the floor. Right? Very upset, right? The Rebbe gave him a bottle of mashke, and it's gone. And he goes home, and he's very, very disturbed. And my grandmother asks him, what's wrong? What happened?
His mother?
No, his wife.
Oh, so it's his great aunt.
No, this is my grandfather and my grandmother, right? My aunt is their daughter, right? So my grandmother asks him, "What's wrong?" So she tells him, "I had a bottle of mashke from the Rebbe, and I completely forgot about it. And I pulled out my talis, and it fell on the floor. And I'm so upset about it." And her face lights up, and she goes, "Mazel tov!" Right? What does the Jew say when the bottle of mashke falls down on the floor? Mazel tov! Wonderful! You're right? Our daughter should be a kala this week. Right? My aunt says that it was less than an hour later when they got a call from one of the shadchan, which turned into the shidduch. And she's, Baruch Hashem, beautiful, happily married with many beautiful children now 41 years later. Right? So this is not something that you need to be a big tzaddik to do.
She's here?
Right?
She's here?
What?
She's here in Miami?
No, she lives in Los Angeles.
I need this.
So this is this is something that every one of us could do, right? When something, we all do this. When a glass bottle falls on the floor, we all say Mazel Tov. But it's pretty easy to do with a glass bottle, right? But when somebody puts glass and we step on it, it's a little harder, right? And when a friend challenges us and makes us angry, it might be it's significantly harder, right? But we have to realize the power that we have. When a person is angry, the anger has a tremendous force, has a tremendous power. And if we could transform that, we could bring out tremendous blessings. So Yitzchak was a Skolener Chassid, and he used to work every day. He used to go to work and would come home very, very late, right? And by the time he came home, his children were usually asleep. His wife would put the kids to sleep every night. Right? On Shabbos, he would have the opportunity to put his kids to sleep. But during the week, that was his wife's job. One day, he comes home a little bit early, and he comes home and he hears that his kids still haven't fallen asleep, and his wife is putting them to bed, right? So he sits down on the couch and he listens to the next room, to the kids going to sleep in the next room, and his wife says Shema Yisrael with them, and then she starts singing, right, in this week's Parsha, the blessing that Yaakov gave to his grandchildren, right? Hamalach HaGoyim. And I'm not sure what tune she used, but I'll use the tune that most of us are familiar with. And this is how she sang it. She sang it a little bit different from how we would usually sing it. She sang it like this. Listen. She says, Hamalach HaGoyeh lo yisi mikol ro yevarech es hane'arim. Right? She says, right? We usually say, Hamalach HaGoyeh lo yisi mikol ro yevarech es hane'arim. Right? The angel that blessed us, that protected, that saved us, that redeemed us from all evil, should bless the children. But she read, the angel that redeemed us from everything, evil should bless the children. Right? Yitzchak jumps out of his seat, and he runs into the next room. He says, Rivka, come here, I got to talk to you. And he says, you mixed up the words here. You used the wrong punctuation over here. You got to sing it over. You got to start from the beginning. You got to sing Ra before Ra is part of the previous sentence. And she says, how come it came Chinik? You came home early one day and you're already mixing into my routine. And he says, no, listen, it's okay. You do a great job, but there's one little thing we got to change. And she says, listen, this is the way my mother's saying it to me. This is the way my grandmother probably saying it to her. And, you could mix out. And when you come home Friday night and you put the kids to bed, you could decide how to sing the song. Right? And he says, listen, I respect all the work you do with the kids. It's amazing. But this is, what you said is, you realize what you said? You said that evil should bless our children. Right?
Well, I like that.
And she says, stop hacking me a chinik. This is how I've always saying it. This is how my mother's saying it. And you mix out of it. Right? What does he do? Yitzchak is first he wants to let it go. He doesn't want to start a fight with his wife. But on the other hand, he doesn't want his children to be blessed by evil. Right? So he decides he's going to go speak to his Rebbe. So he goes to the Skolener Rebbe. And he tells the Skolener Rebbe what happened. Right? He tells him exactly what happened. And he says, Rebbe, I know how important Shalom Bayis is, but this is, my children, the protection, the safety of my children. And the Rebbe says, listen, if that's how she sings it, that's how she's been taught, she could continue singing it. So the Rebbe says, yeah, Rebbe, I know how important Shalom Bayis is, I know how important that is, but this is for my children. This is for the sake of my children. Right? I don't want the evil to bless them. So the Rebbe said, what are you talking about? It's a clear Gemara. The Gemara says that every Friday night, a Jew comes home from shul, and two angels come home with him, right? Escort him on his way home from shul. One is an angel of good, and one is an angel of evil, right? And if they come to the house, and they see that the house is lit up, the Shabbos table is set up nicely, everyone's sitting around nicely around the Shabbos table, right? Then the good angel says, it should be Hashem's will that next week should also be like this, right? And the evil angel is forced to answer Amen, right? And if Chas v'Shalom the opposite happens, then it's the evil angel who says it should be next week, and the good angel is forced to bless. So he says, your wife is giving you an amazing bracha. Even the evil angel should have to bless your children, should have to bless your family. So what is the Rebbe telling you? Right? What's the message behind this story? The message behind the story is that this is what we're saying over here. Right? When Shabbos comes in, right? The Gemara says that Friday afternoon is the most opportune time for fights to break out. Right? The Gemara says many stories about a mayor who traveled to a certain city and there were fights that would break out in the city every Friday afternoon. It's a very stressful time, right? And Shabbos comes in, we just finished a very stressful situation, and we can come into our house and we can start yelling and screaming about things, right? Or we could say, no. We can take all of the anger, all the stress, and we could say, let's channel it into Shabbos, right? We can take our boim shanokut bedor, the terrible anger, the terrible wrath that Hashem says was against the Jewish people. And we can say, there's terrible anger and frustration going on. But we're going to transform that into Mizmar LeDavid, into a song for David, into a song for Shabbos. And if we're able to do that, then we can have the evil bless their children. What does that mean? We could take all the power, the powerful anger that we have, which apparently would usually be used in an evil way. And we can take that and channel that and use it to bless our children and to bless our family. Right? And this is why we start off every Shabbos like this. Right? And we sing. We come and we sing. For 40 years there's a great wrath and quarreling and anger. And then Shabbos comes in. And Mizmar LeDavid, right? There's a big song starts. The calmness, the quietness, the serenity of Shabbos. We could transform that. Right? And this is what's going on, right, with Yaakov Avinu, right? We all have to do this. This is a message for all of us, right? We all have to realize the power that we have when we're upset about something, when something's bothering us, right? To turn around and to use it for blessing instead of for yelling, right? A man once came to Rab Shlomka of Zavil, and he began complaining about a competitor of his that had opened a store right across the street from his store. And he started to yell this is a different story. It's the mayor from Ishlan. And he started to yell, and he was screaming, and so he started cursing out his competitor. And Shlomka says, "Well, you cursing? What, he's cursing him out? That's how you talk." And he said, "Rebbe, I'm furious. I'm angry." And the Rebbe says, "So why are you cursing? You believe that your words have power to harm him?" He says, "Of course, my words have power. Right? I'm really mad at him, and I'm cursing him out." So Rebbe says, "Well, if your words have so much power, and instead of using your words to curse your competitor, why don't you use your words to bless your own business, to daven to Hashem, to give your business, to give you parnasa, to give you everything you need." Right? And this is a choice that we face. Right? When we're angry, we could choose to use our anger to curse out our competitor, or we could use it to bless ourselves and our family and our children. And this is what Yaakov is coming along and saying. Yaakov, for 22 years, he was separated from his son Yosef. He suffered, he was in pain for 22 years. Right? And finally, after they reunited, we don't find anywhere that any of his sons apologized for what they did. And Yaakov is now leaving this world. And Yaakov has frustration and pain still from those 22 years. Yes.
Did you found out?
There are different... Well, the question is how much he knew. But according to Rashi, he clearly knew that Shimon and Levi were responsible, and that's why he yelled at them. Right? That's why he spoke about this. But Yaakov now has a choice. Right? Yaakov has a lot of pain over those 22 years. And Yaakov turns to his children. And not only that, Yaakov now could choose to become angry. And Yaakov sees that his two children, Shimon and Levi, also became angry. They became angry at their brother Yosef, they were angry at Shechem, and he sees how they use their anger. And Yaakov says, I want to teach my children something. I want to teach Shimon and Levi something. I want to teach them that when you're angry, instead of taking your brother and selling him into slavery, you could use that anger to bless somebody. And therefore he called Shimon and Levi over. And he said, I want to bless you. How am I going to bless you? So Yaakov tells his children, Oror apam ki oz, ve'avrasam ki kashasa. Cursed be their anger, their rage, for it is fierce, and their fury, for it is harsh. What does that mean? Fierce and harsh. Yaakov is telling them, there's nothing wrong with anger. But if your anger is fierce and harsh, if you use your anger to attack somebody, then it's curse. But you could take that same anger and you can bless somebody. You and Levi, I'm so angry at you. And you should both be scattered and spread out amongst Yaakov and amongst Israel. What does that mean? Rashi tells us. The Medrash tells us. And Yaakov says, right? On one hand, it seems like Yaakov is yelling at them. But Yaakov is telling them, Shimon, I want you to be school teachers and scribes. Right? I want you to be the teachers. All over Eretz Yisrael, whenever you're looking for a good teacher, from Shevet Shimon. Right? And that caused them to be spread out amongst the entire nation. Levi, he says, I want you to serve Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash. And I want you to travel all over Eretz Yisrael collecting trumos and meisers from the Jewish people. So he took the anger and, so to speak, what seemed, when you first looked at it, to be almost a curse. And instead he turned it into a blessing. And not only that, these words of Yaakov didn't only teach Shimon and Levi how to transform their own anger into blessing. Not only did Yaakov take his own anger and transform it into blessing, but we find many, many years later, when Bilam comes to curse the Jewish people, he says, "Ma ekov le'kavakel." How can I curse them if Hashem never cursed them? Comes along Rashi and he says, what does that mean? It means that when Yaakov was really angry at Shimon and Levi, and he should have cursed them out, instead he cursed their anger, but he blessed them. So Bilam said, if Yaakov was able to transform the blessings, the curses into a blessing, how can I curse them? My curses are also going to be transformed into a blessing. Right? So this power that Yaakov had was not only transforming his own anger, not only teaching Shimon and Levi to transform their anger, but hundreds of years later, he was able to transform Bilam's curses into blessings. And just to conclude with one final story, in the city of Vilna lived Yankel, a young bacher, Yankel. And Yankel was in yeshiva, but he didn't do very well in yeshiva. He wasn't very interested in learning. He wasn't really interested in all this, all the mitzvahs, all the Torah that they're doing, all the mitzvahs that they're observing. And he decided he's going to leave the yeshiva and start living his own life. What? His name was Yankel. At least that's what we're calling him for this story, right? So Yankel leaves the yeshiva and he stops davening every day. He stops eating kosher. After a while, he stops keeping Shabbos, and he starts enjoying life. One day, he gets a letter, a draft notice from the Russian army, right? Or I don't know if it was under Russia at that time. I'm not sure what army it was under. What?
What year?
This was before World War I. So he gets the draft notice.
I don't know. The Vilna became Soviet Union after the war.
So maybe it was after. I'm not sure exactly. This was Chaim Oizer.
World War II, not one.
So it was before World War II. After World War II.
It became part of Soviet Union after World War II.
So I guess it wasn't the Russian army. It was whatever the army it was at that time, right? And he received a draft notice. And I think it was during World War I. It might have been during World War II, but I don't think so. And this was, of course, for a Jew, a draft notice causes lots of religious problems. But even for a Jew who is secular, he doesn't want to spend years in the army. First of all, it's dangerous. It's difficult. It's dangerous. And for a Jew, he has to worry not only about bullets coming from the front, he has to worry about bullets coming from behind as well, right? So, so what does he do, right? How does he get out of it? So he knows that all of his friends in yeshiva have a whole system of getting out of the draft. And so he starts asking, some of his friends, what do they do? And they tell him, you should go to the tzaddik of Chaim Oizer. Chaim Oizer Kaczynski, the based in Vilna at the time, and ask for his blessing. Okay, he's going to go to Reb Chaim Oizer, and he's getting ready to go to Reb Chaim Oizer, but he thinks to himself, if I walk in Reb Chaim Oizer dressed the way I am, he's going to throw me out, right? They're not going to accept, they're not going to let me go inside if I look the way I look now, right? Without a kippah, dressed like a goy. So he looks into the back of his closet and he pulls out his dusty old yarmulke and tzitzis and his yeshiva clothing, and he puts it on. He makes sure the tzitzis are hanging out. Everybody can see it, right? Then he puts on the yarmulke, and he goes to Reb Chaim Oizer to get a bracha. So he comes in. Reb Chaim Oizer looks at him. And he tells Reb Chaim Oizer, he tells Reb Chaim Oizer a story. He receives a draft notice and he wants the bracha to avoid the draft. And Chaim Oizer, looks him up and down, and he says, I see you have nice tzitzis. Well, when was the last time you wore these tzitzis? And he says, well, Rebbe, it's been a few years, they're a little dusty, but I wore them today, Rebbe. And I said, what about tefillin? Did you put on tefillin this morning? And he says, no, I'm going to put them on later, whatever, it didn't happen yet. And I said, what about Shabbos? Kosher? He puts his head down, and he's like, unfortunately not, Rebbe, right? He's not going to lie to the tzaddik, right? And the Rebbe puts his head down and he starts thinking. And Yankel's getting nervous. Should he run out now, right? The Rebbe's probably gonna, who knows what the Rebbe's gonna tell him now, right? The Rebbe's gonna tear him apart. He wants to get a blessing from the Rebbe. He's now praying he shouldn't get the opposite of a blessing, right? Finally, Reb Chaim Ozer looks up and he says to him, I give you a blessing that the officers in the draft office should be as disappointed in you as I am right now. It's a nice bracha, right? He goes out, he goes the next day to the draft office, he comes in, the officer takes one look at him, he's like, what, another skinny, wimpy Jew they brought here? What a disappointment. I'm afraid to breathe next year, I'm going to blow you over. When was the last time you ate something? You ever went to a gym in your life? You expect people like this to join the army? He turns to the secretary, I don't want to see this guy again. It's terrible. What a terrible disappointment this guy is. Right? He goes out, and a week later he goes back to Reb Chaim Ozer and he says, listen, Rebbe, thank you. First of all, thank you for the bracha. This time he's again wearing a yarmulke and tzitzis. And he says, Rebbe, today I put on tefillin, and Rebbe, Baruch Hashem, I was a disappointment to the army officers, but I don't want to disappoint you again. And he turned his life around, and Baruch Hashem, he was able to start living a life according to Torah and mitzvahs again. So we all have to realize in our own life, there are going to be times when we get upset, when something makes us angry, something makes us disappointed. And we have a choice. We could take that energy, that power that exists in our anger, in our frustration, in our disappointment, and we can use it as a curse. We can curse everybody, we curse the whole world out. Or we could turn that around, and we can use it to bless ourselves, to bless our families, to bless everyone around us. And we should all make the right choice. L'chaim, l'chaim.